Hello, my name is Diego Guzman, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys about anatomy. I'm just going to go over a few key parts of the body, so I'm not going to spam your guys' brain with all the parts of the body because it's a Friday, and we're really not trying to be here for like an hour. So, the parts that I'm just going to describe are going to be the bones that make up the arm, and that's going to include the humerus, the ulna, and the radius. That's all I'm going to cover for right now, and I am going to go over a few key terms that you guys need to know. So, for example, let's just start off from the very basics of anatomy. The way that you guys want to be able to describe these points and parts are going to be using key terms. Now, whenever we are talking about anatomy, usually we want to refer to everything from an anatomical position because it makes things a lot more easier for the people that are, that you're describing these body parts to, or these bones, or even like these landmarks. So, everything in anatomy that we usually go to look at from default is going to be from an anatomical position or anatomical POV. And whenever we're looking at something anatomically, it's basically referring to everything being from an anterior view. So anterior basically means the front of or the front view. So right now, the way I'm looking at you guys and the way that I'm talking to you guys on this phone and camera is I'm looking at you guys and you're looking at me from an anterior perspective. So this is going to be an anatomical position, the way that I'm at. So the only difference is that usually whenever you stand, you have your hands at your sides and you have your thumbs like kind of facing toward, I have my thumbs facing towards you guys. So in anatomy, usually it's going to be our thumbs pointing outwards and my palm is going to be facing you guys. So it's going to look something like this and it's going to be facing you guys. Now that we got that out of the way, another key term that you guys are going to need to know for me to describe these parts of the bone to you are going to be posterior, and posterior is going to be the back of. So right now I'm looking at the front of you guys, or you guys are looking at the front of me, and the back of me is going to be the posterior view. Now lateral medial gets a little bit confusing, but I'll explain it. Medial is basically when you cut, basically imagine cutting my body in half, and that line is going to be the midline. And whenever we're trying to describe lateral medial, lateral is basically referring to further away from that line, and medial is referring to closer to that line. So from, let's say, our anatomical position, like I said, my thumbs are facing outwards and my pinky is closer to my body. So if I was to describe lateral medial in a sentence, I would say my thumb is lateral, to the midline, or I would say something like my pinky is medial to the midline. I would say things like that. And if you ever want to compare relation, I would say my thumb is more lateral than my pinky. Just little ways like that to describe things in order for it to make more sense to the person that you're describing things to. And especially in anatomy, we want to be really descriptive and really detailed about parts of the body and parts of the bone. Just like in real life, if let's say there was a fire somewhere, and then let's say there was a baby stuck in a fire in an apartment building, you aren't going to tell the cops or the firefighters, oh, hey, there's a baby trapped in an apartment. I don't know the name of the apartment complex or the address, but I know it's in the Anaheim city, or let's say Placentia, wherever you live. Now, let's assume that that's one way that you can say it, right? It's going to take them forever to be able to find this place or this landmark. Now, let's say that you tell them a very descriptive way so they could find it faster. You would say something like, oh, there's a baby in a burning building in an apartment named this, give the address, or you can say by these two cross streets. There's just a lot of ways to describe certain parts of the body to make it easier for the person that you're describing it to, or just for yourself to be able to identify these landmarks. But that's just a few ways and why it's so important for us to use key terms in anatomy. Now without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the parts of the body and the bones that make up the arm. Okay, so now let's start off. So I'm going to be using just visual aids and also pictures, just because it would make more sense this way. So to start off, we're going to be going over the parts of the arm, and it's going to include everything that makes up the arm, which is going to include the humerus, it's going to include the ulna, and it's going to include the radius. Now this is a very nice detailed picture of everything, but instead of pointing to you guys like, this is the humerus, this is the coronoid fossa, this is this, this is that, I think I want to make it a little bit more interesting for you guys, and I actually want to show it on a picture that I made. So I'll refer to this just so you guys can see which bones we're going to be talking about. However, the bones that I will be talking about are actually right here in this diagram that I made, or I guess this little picture that I made. So right here we have the first bone. and that bone is called the humerus. Now, the humerus is an interesting bone because it's one of it's the biggest bone that we have in that makes up our arm. Now, it's also very interesting because it's got a lot of interesting parts to it. It has a really big head, and it has a little tuberosity here, and it has a bunch of little fossas everywhere. So the main part that we're going to basically describe for this part of the class is going to be how to be able to tell where is what and who is what. So right here at the top we have the humeral head. So this is exactly what the humerus is going to look like, and this is going to be what it's going to look like from the back. The posterior view, which like I mentioned earlier is the dorsal or back portion. Now the humerus head, you're going to be able to tell that it's the humeral head because it looks exactly like this. It looks like this big like ball that looks like an actual head, so like a circular head. Now next to that, just like in a body how we have the head, we also have a neck right there. So on the humeral head we have here the head, and right next to it we have the neck. In anatomy it's a little bit weird because we have two necks. Technically, we have the anatomical neck, and then we also have the surgical neck. The anatomical neck goes from here to there on the actual humeral head, whereas the neck is more like a traditional neck, where it goes below the head, right there, and it's usually a little, it's like thinner than the head. The head is really big. And apart from that, we're also going to have a few other landmarks that we're going to be able to have to identify, and it's going to be right here, which is the deltoid tuberosity. Now the deltoid tuberosity is a little bit difficult to understand where it's at, but it's easy as well at the same time because you basically are going to have this big bump in the bone in the humerus, and you're going to be able to, that's the deltoid tuberosity, not only because of the way that it's shaped, but also because these little lines that I drew here indicate that it's rough. So it's going to be a rough surface, and the reason why it's rough is actually because of the deltoid muscle that attaches to it. And usually this doesn't happen unless it's a muscle that directly attaches to a bone, and that's what creates these rough little imprints on the bone. Now, apart from that, we're going to need to know a few other things before we go all the way down here, and it's going to be the greater tubercle and the lesser tubercle. Now, these are very easy to identify because the greater tubercle, you can always think about the top portion, and the lesser tubercle, you can always think about the bottom portion. Now, greater tubercle, you have great men up here, lesser men down there, pretty easy, up and down. Now, the harder part is going to be to identify the intertubercular groove. Now, on the actual bone, it's a little bit hard to see where the tubercular groove is, but I actually realized that whenever you turn the bone this way, so whenever, let's say this is the bone and you turn it this way, just like I did my pen, basically the tubercular groove creates this little like C or little notch right here, and that's basically what an intertubercular groove is. It's basically this little indentation in the middle that separates the greater tubercle and the lesser tubercle. And the way that I always look at it is kind of like Moses separating the sea. I look at it exactly like that, where you have it separating the lesser and greater tubercle, and down the middle you have the intertubercular groove. Now, going down to the humerus, we have a few things. So we have the capitulum that we have to remember, and we have the trochlea. So the easiest way to remember the capitulum, besides its shape, so whenever I look at it, it's also based on its shape. I realize that the capitulum is more of the rounder portion of, the humerus. But another way that I can remember capitulum is because I just remember this portion of the name, Tulum. And I don't know if a lot of people here go to the beach, but I've always wanted to go to Tulum. And Tulum, whenever you think of the beach, it's this big, bumpy little circle island, in the beach. You just think of this like nice paradise. And that's exactly what I see whenever I look at this capitulum right here, this part of the bone. And I just imagine like it's, super round, but I remember the name because of Tulum, so capitulum. So that's just a little way that I try to remember that. Now, I drew on here these little red indentations, and what that basically signifies is little fossas or craters, or little curvy grooves that go deeper into the bone. So the last part that we have to remember about the humerus is this. It's going to be the olecranon fossa. Now, the olecranon fossa is actually located on the posterior side, so the back side of the humerus. And the back side of the humerus, it's basically going to have this big hole right here at the back. And the way that I always like to identify fossas is I always imagine, because it's such a big hole and deep hole too, I always imagine, I mean, they could be small as well, but I like to imagine that it was because of a meteor, and whenever a meteor, they hit the ground, they create these big little holes and gaps and indentations into things. So that's exactly what I think about when I see a fossa. It's exactly that, kind of like a deep crevice of sorts. So the olecranon fossa, it's always easy for me to remember, just because I remember that big gap right here, olecranon fossa, and fossas. I usually just imagine it being like a meteor. And one way to be able to identify if it's the backside, posterior, or anterior side of a humerus is the posterior side is always going to have this olecranon fossa, and that fossa is always going to be very, very big compared to everything else. And now, apart from that, the front side of the humerus, it's always going to have these bumps. And for everyone who's blind and is in anatomy, I feel bad for you. But, one part that's good is you'll be able to feel these bumps, and you'll be able to tell, okay, that's the anatomical position of the humerus. Now, going to this portion right here, we have a few other things. We have the midline, and we have lateral. Now, I already went ahead and explained that part. I just wanted to have them there just so I can kind of describe the rest of these bones. And the last part of the ulna, which is this, the ends, these are going to be called styloid processes. And usually, like I said, in anatomy, you want to be super, super specific. So whenever you name something, because there's a styloid here as well at the radius, you also want to name what part styloid that's from. So styloid process of the ulna is going to help you a lot, especially when describing all these different parts. So the styloid right here, that's actually a very, 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 very small styloid on the actual bone, and it actually connects to the pinky. So for example, right here, this is exactly what it looks like. The styloid process looks like this little tiny little thing. And over here, the radius, that has this other big process, and basically that is a little bit chunkier. And the way that I like to differentiate where they go is the styloid process of the ulna is super skinny, so it goes to the smallest part of the hand. So it would be like the tiny pinky, because you associate that with feeble. And over here you have this big chunky process, and I always associate that with the thumb because that's where it points towards, the thumb. And the thumb is just this big chunky piece of meat on your hand. Now, apart from that, in the ulna, you want to know a few things. So you want to know the radial notch, and that's the radial notch that is right there, and this would be the anterior side of the bone. And whenever we're talking anteriorly, that means the bone is facing directly at you when it comes to the ulna. So you'll notice these little red lines that I drew, and that's basically because that's the flatter or more the smoother side of the ulna, versus the back right here, which I drew the lateral view, the side view. It basically has this little weird, I guess, more of a ridge. So whenever you're actually looking at the bone, you'll notice a ridge more towards the back, and the flatter, more smoother side will be the actual anterior view. So whenever you're looking at it, just look at this anterior view. And because we know that the radius, it attaches to the thumb, you'll be able to tell if it's left or right. So if the circle is here, or the notch is here, the radial notch, if the radius attaches to that. So if the radius attaches to that and you're looking at it from the correct view anteriorly, you would know that this would end up being a left ulna. Now, the ulna has a few other parts that you have to remember, which is right here, the trochlear notch. It's where these little red smooth things are, and it's, like I said, a crevice. That's what it represents, a crevice, or kind of like a deeper portion of the bone. And this is what it looks like from the side, and you're going to be able to tell that this is the ulna because the ulna creates a C, and I always associate that kind of like with a wrench. So the ulna, this right here, is going to be the trochlear notch, this whole part of the C, and right next to it on the points are going to be the olecranon, and the olecranon is going to be next to the coronoid process. Those two processes are going to be, and on top of that, the trochlear notch is going to be what attaches to right here, this bottom portion of the humerus, as shown right there. Now, last but not least, from the ulna, I'm going to go ahead and describe right here. It's going to be the radius, the final portion of this. So radius is super easy. It only has like 3 parts that we really have to remember, which is the radial head, the radial tuberosity, and then the styloid process of the ulna. Now, the styloid process of the ulna, like I said, is always super easy to remember because it's going to be that fat, chunky, spiky, pointy portion that attaches to the thumb, or that points toward the thumb. So that's an easy way to be able to tell if it's going to be, where the thumb's going to be. Now, how you're going to be able to tell if it's a left or right ulna, or sorry, a left or right radius, is going to be a little bit difficult, but usually the radius as well, just like the ulna, it has a rough side and then it has a more smoother side. So the rough side is going to have all these little bumps along the styloid, and right here it's going to have this weird like groove, or I guess kind of like a ridge. Now that's going to be the posterior side. The anterior side is actually going to be a lot more smoother, and it's going to have like, it's going to be more of a flatter side. And on top of that, that's basically going to be the one way that you're going to be able to tell if it's a left or right. Now, on this side, the anterior view, the correct view that we're supposed to be looking at it, you're going to have thumb sticking out of the styloid process of the ulna, be very descriptive. And the other two parts of the radius, which are super easy to remember, is just the radial head, which is at the top, and then it's going to be the radial tuberosity. Radial tuberosity is going to be this little bump that's really rough. It's the same as the deltoid tuberosity, but the only difference is for this one, the actual muscle that makes up this tuberosity, I think it's the biceps brachia, which is, or brachia, it's spelled this way, brachii, the biceps brachii muscle, I believe. So apart from that, that's going to be the end of this class session. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope I helped you guys be able to identify some of the ways to easily be able to differentiate these key structures with little pictures that I drew to tell what is what, and to identify these different things of the bones. And I just believe that this is a lot more helpful than, let's say, a picture like this, because although it shows you where everything kind of gets placed and it's a little bit harder to see it and to identify it without it being descriptive. So yeah, I hope this helped, and thank you very much.